So thank you for the opportunity to come here today and talk to you. So I work as a researcher at the Norwegian Public Health Institute in Oslo. And part of my research interest lies in understanding how modern technology impacts youth, both their academic performance, but as well as their mental health. And in my PhD dissertation, I had a chapter about how smartphone bans in school impacted the students' outcomes. And I showed that banning smartphones from schools had a positive effect, especially on girls' mental health and their academic performance. So my thesis has become very popular among teachers and parents in Norway. It's not so popular among teenagers because my thesis led the Norwegian government to take a decision to ban phones on all schools in Norway. And as I'm a researcher today, I am here to talk about especially what in my fields of economics says about how technology impacts teenagers and children's health and their academic performance. So social media started to gain particularly its importance in the early 2000s. And at the same time, we also saw that mental health started to worsen among young people. Today, mental health disorders account for 1/3 of the global disease or the global burden of disease. It's also the most common form of these mental disorders is anxiety and depression. But it's also estimated that more than 70% of these cases could have been avoided if optimal treatment were provided. So where I live in Norway, one of the richest countries in the world, more than 40% of young people say that they have symptoms related to depression. We should take this very severe, because mental disorders is correlated to a lot of long-term costly outcomes, such as lower labor market productivity once you grow up. It's correlated with worse health as you grow up, and ultimately it's also correlated to higher suicide rate. And this is a very striking, and this is a very striking graph showing the school year and how suicide rates varies with the school around the school year. And as you can see, during summer breaks, suicide rates drops for young people between 12 to 18 years old. It also drops with the winter holidays. While we look at for older cohorts, that's like, or individuals between 19 to 25, we don't see this variation around the school year. And this means that the school or the school environment is a very difficult arena for some children or young adults. This graph, also in this is a research paper from the US by Hansen. If you would look at Google search for bullying, and so you would see the same pattern. So at the same time as we see these trends or this worsening in mental health, we also observe around or on average in all OECD countries that we have declining test scores. That goes for all topics, both mathematics, reading, and science. And I mean, these are just, what I show you now is just trends. But what we know is that at least that these this is happening at the same time that we see the test scores are declining and the mental health among young people are worsening. So if we just look at the trends or the correlations between grade point average and screen time, we see that the more young adults or children, the more they spend using a screen, the lower is their grade point average in school. We see the same thing when we look at mental health, that there is a positive, it is instead a positive correlation. So the more you use screen time during the day, the more likely you are to have a mental health issue. That pattern is particularly striking for girls. So, I mean, this is important to understand in the world we live today, because more than 30% of students, they also say that in school that they are distracted by digital devices every day in school. So I think when I grew up during the 90s and the early 2000s, we were really thinking about that the internet should only make us children smarter, and we were quite uncritical to schools being more and more digitalized, such as providing children with laptops and more and more. Okay, so why should we, I mean, these graphs, why should we then take this so serious? So one thing is that we know that children that have mental health problems, they perform a lot worse in school. So there is like this strong association between health problems and negative school performance. So for instance, children that have some kind of mental health problems, they have a or they are as much as 2 times more likely to drop out of school compared to those children who don't have any mental health problem. And behind these numbers, there is, of course, a lot of patterns that we don't see. For instance, there is a lot of differences between the genders, between boys and girls, but there is also a lot of difference when it comes to socioeconomic inequalities. So if we look at the data, we know that girls, they are a lot more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety compared to boys. Boys are instead a lot more often diagnosed with behavioral disorders. Behavioral disorders are, for instance, ADHD and ADD and so on. But we also know that girls, they outperform boys in school, and that is not a new thing. They have been doing that for a very long time. But the only exception is in mathematics. And girls also continue to be underrepresented in the STEM field, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And this is also a reason, or believed to be one of the reasons why the gender inequality in wages persists. We know that girls, they spend a lot more, or they spend substantial more time on social media compared to boys. So these are my own calculations from a survey in Norway, where you can see that especially around like the ages starting maybe at age 12 and 13, girls start to spend a lot more time on social media compared to boys. So this is I mean, when they're around 15, this graph tells you that, I mean, over 50% of the girls, they spend more than 2 hours on social media compared to boys, where only about 33% do so. Often when you use this kind of survey data, I should also say that often the maximum you can answer is 2 hours. So these girls probably spend a lot more time than 2 hours. I think it was an adult that wrote this survey. We also know that there is large inequalities when it comes to mental disorders. So children that come from low income families, they have a lot higher prevalence of having anxiety or depression, particularly when it comes to girls. But if you instead look at boys, it's a quite striking pattern that those belonging to the lowest percentile have a lot more attention deficit or hyperactive disorders, which is basically ADHD. And these trends and patterns, they have a lot to say about the quality of opportunities for children. Because differences in physical and mental health during our childhood, they are a significant source of socioeconomic disparities into adulthood, and they are also a source of why there is persistency across generations, both when it comes to socioeconomic status, but also our health. I think most of us know about something that is called like the digital divide when we talk about it within and across countries, such as access to the internet. We know that low-income countries, they have they don't have as good internet connection as many of the OECD countries and so on, but this is also often exists within countries. But today there is also suggestions that there is a kind of new digital divide, especially perhaps between socioeconomic groups, where we see that children from low-income families, they are more exposed to harmful content online, while children instead that comes from higher socioeconomic groups, they spend less time on these kinds of social media platforms, and they spend more time on activities as just hanging out with friends or being with their family. One of the biggest policy tools today that most countries uses to reach or to argue for equality of opportunity is free public education. But if our education system is not well designed, or if then these inequalities can actually just be reinforced instead of that we like lower these inequalities between these different groups. And today we also know that this inequality between these especially between these socioeconomic groups, when it comes to like this usage of digital tools, but also like how we are distracted in the classroom of these kinds of technology. So we know that children that perform more like academically weaker, they find it a lot harder to concentrate in the classroom when these tools are present. They are also a lot more likely to turn to like social media or just like look at YouTube and so on during lecture time when they are boarding. And this is, I mean, this is important to remember because, I mean, the impact of how we use this technology in schools might therefore differ a lot across the socioeconomic spectrum. These questions have been especially this about the mental health crisis among the younger generation has gained a lot of visibility in the media. I mean, we know that this is a public concern, that I mean, the mental health crisis among our younger generation. Okay, so I will structure this lecture around basically 4 parts. So I will talk a little bit, or just a few slides, about what is actually good research and what research can we trust. I will then turn to talk a little bit about what the research, particularly within my field of economics, what it has to say about internet access and student outcomes. I will then talk about how technology in education has affected children and adolescents' outcomes. And lastly, I will say something about policy advice and how we can use this research to inform school policies. So what is actually good research? It's very hard to know, even if you have a PhD in economics, what good research actually is. There is very often that we see articles or we see posts on Instagram and they refer to a lot of research, and it's very easy then to think that, yeah, I mean, there is a reference attached to this sentence, then it must be true. Unfortunately, that's very often not the case. There is a lot of research out there that is being published that is very often interpreted in the wrong way, but also there is a lot of research just being published that perhaps doesn't have the quality that we should use this to inform policy. Okay. This doesn't want to work. Okay. So as I work as an economist, I'm quite obsessed with something that is called correlation versus causation. So everything I showed you up to now is just correlation. It just shows trends and patterns. It doesn't mean that one thing causes the other one. So, for instance, when we think about, I mean, screen time, the graph I showed you on like screen time use among teenagers and their grade point average, that just shows the correlation between an individual that uses, that spend a lot of time online and their test score. But it doesn't say anything about what came first, because what came actually first, like, I mean, the hen or the egg, that is what we have to use causation for to answer. So correlation just shows how, like, 2 variables moves together, because we often, for instance, when it's come to screen times or social media use, we know that, I mean, teenagers, I think we can just think about ourselves. That if we feel lonely or if we are sad, it's very easy to turn to social media or just like do a lot of scrolling online to alleviate those feelings. And it's also perhaps the cause of these mental health issues is maybe not like the screen time use, but it's rather like that you belong to a certain socioeconomic group or so on. And this is important because if we want to inform policy, we have to use research to say something about the causation, because otherwise we could reach a completely wrong policy conclusion. Maybe it's not the case that social media is harmful for teenagers. Maybe it's just that, I mean, as I said, they just turn to social media when they feel sad or lonely, but what is actually the cause is school pressure or something else. And then we would spend a lot of money banning, for instance, social media platforms, while we instead should have worked on like helping teenagers or children feeling less school pressures. So, I mean, the gold standards within research is something that is called randomized controlled trials. A lot of people have heard this, especially when it's come to medicine, that you have like two groups, you randomize, so someone gets a medicine, the other groups maybe just gets like sugar pills or something, and then you maybe get this medicine over 4 weeks' time, and then in the end you compare these two groups and you say, yeah, did this medicine actually help with this sickness or not? That is often very hard to do when we do research within social science, because we are often interested in questions that is maybe very hard to randomize. So what we then instead, or at least a lot of economists have turned to, is something that is called natural experiments. So natural experiments is when we use something that just happens in the society naturally. There might be a reform or a policy or some changes over time, and we use this as an experiment to look at those people that were exposed to this reform or not, and compare it to the people who were not exposed to this reform. I don't know if you think this sounds too good or too bad, but at least it was this kind of method was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, or not the Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2021. And for the rest of my talk, all of the papers that I will present and talk about uses either like this randomized control trials, or they make use of like these kinds of natural experiments. Okay, so what has the internet to say about students' outcomes? As I said before, I think when the internet came, we were only thinking about that, I mean, the internet, at least when it's come to education, that it should only make like all children smarter. It should really be like a learning tool, and it should just provide more opportunity for everyone in education. So, first of all, I mean, globally, more than 2/3 of the world's population, they do have access to the internet. And I mean, within the OECD countries, I mean, most of us have access to the internet, but there is, of course, a big digital divide here as well, especially when it's come to low-income countries. It's also the case that a smaller share of young people have access to the internet if you compare it just to like the average here. Okay, but how has like the internet affected the children and adolescents? So we know from survey evidence that children, they use the internet daily from the age of 10. From survey evidence, we also know that they spend about 4 to 7 hours online per day. And what is striking about that is that that is not including time that they spend for doing homework or other study-related activities. And I think that especially economists, that's me, we have always been thinking about technology advancements at leading to increased productivity and better human capital accumulation. But at least when it comes to education and students, I mean, there is a drawback, and that is if students would trade off their time that they could spend on like schoolwork or other homework activities, and instead like do these like non-study related activities. But then there is, of course, like the positive effect of internet or having access to the internet in school if it's used as a learning tool. So these are two papers within my field that I really like a lot. It's one paper from Italy and one from Spain, where they use this kind of methodology as like a natural experiment. So, I mean, when we got access to broadband, not like every municipality or every part of the country got it at the same time. And the difference often depended a lot of like this telecommunication infrastructure that were there prior to like the broadband internet and so on. And these two paper uses that kind of difference between these municipalities to look at like what is the effect of having access to the internet and comparing it to the people who got it just a little bit later then. It's also this like difference in the telecommunication infrastructure had very little to say for anything else than this layout of the broadband internet. And what these two papers show is that the internet access caused an increase in the diagnosis in depression in Italy. What is also very interesting in this paper is that they show that females, especially younger females with the internet, get a higher rate of eating disorders and sleeping disorders. So this paper from Spain, they also show that, like, I mean, with high-speed internet, adolescents' behavioral and mental health worsened. They also see this effect, especially among girls and not on boys. And they show that, like, I mean, this high-speed internet really caused like more addictive internet use, and it caused like teenagers to sleep less, spend a lot less time on homework and other like family and social activities. So that was about mental health, but okay, so if we think about academic performance, I mean, the effect could be different. And here, the research is not as conclusive as when it comes to mental health. But generally, what the research says is that, I mean, both internet access at home or at school have actually had like no effect or even negative consequences for students' school performance. These results, they depend a lot on like several factors, such as what kind of subject you look into when you measure students' school performance. Also like usage, I mean, the age group you look at, which country, or the socioeconomic status of these individuals. But with the internet, also there was this, when internet came, also people started to use a lot more social media. And I think when we think especially about social media, we think about when Facebook made its entrance in like 2008. So Facebook is, of course, not the social media app that children and teenagers uses today. So I was talking the other day with my nephew about this, that just said, yeah, but Facebook is just for old people. that's maybe true, but when Facebook arrived, it was used by students or college students in the US. So there is actually a very good paper coming from the US. This shows that when Facebook, because Facebook just started at one university and then it was adopted at different universities over time. And they used this variation that Facebook was adopted at different universities at different years to measure the effect on these college students. And they showed that Facebook actually caused a decline in students' mental health, and the students also report that because of this worse mental health, they also have worse academic performance. Then there is also another paper that used instead like a randomized control trials where they pay participants to deactivate their Facebook account. So what they show is that this treatment group, they spend a lot more time with their family and friends and have like at least a small increase in their subjective well-being. Okay, so this next paper that I will show you is perhaps not so much about academic performance, but it's very much related to mental health. So with the internet, there is of course also a lot of risk. I think we are all very much aware of that, because the more time they spend online, the more they are also exposed to digital risk, like bullying, sexting, or other like harmful content. We know that like in the OECD countries, more than 1 in 10 adolescents report that they have been victims of cyberbullying. I also looked up these numbers for Poland, and then they are actually a lot more higher. I think it was 1 in 6 adolescents here. So, of course, the most severe form of this would be when adolescents are exposed to like sexting or things related to this. And there is a very interesting paper from Norway. This uses, again, this type of natural experiments, because in Norway, not every municipality got the internet at the same time. And they can use this variation to measure a causal effect if internet actually caused more or triggered more sex crime. And that is exactly what they show. So they show that when the internet came, we also got an increased incidence of rape and other sex crimes. So, and in the paper you show that the mechanism here is probably like the increased consumption of pornographic content. So, but from a policy perspective, it's then very easy to think that, yeah, maybe we should just censor the internet, or we should put a lot of restriction on internet access in schools or at home or whatever. But it's very then important to understand what the mechanism behind these results that we see, because if it is the case that like this internet, what is caused like this more incidents of rape and other sex crimes, it's just like a matching effect between the perpetrator and the offender. We should just, I mean, then maybe the policy advice should instead be to improve like transparency and raising awareness about this like online dangers on these forums and so on. Okay, so to sum up this part, so we know that from research, we know that internet actually caused a negative, or it has negative impacts on mental health and students' performance. I mean, the reason for this is because it's addictive, it reduces sleep, homework time, and family and social interaction. And we also know that social media, it harms the mental health, particularly among our children and adolescents. And the reason for that, which they show in this Facebook paper, is because it increases like social comparison. And understanding these kinds of mechanisms is then very important for policy advice. So in this next part, I will talk a little bit about technology in education, because it has become very popular to digitalize the classroom just as much as we can. So, for instance, it's very popular with this. It's called like one-to-one programs, where you give like every student a laptop, or they should have a laptop or a PC or so on in school. Or these tablets. So in Norway, they even give tablets to children in kindergarten, I think, at some places. And I mean, the proponents of this, they just argue that, I mean, computers and tablets, or I mean, smartphones, they can just enhance like teaching, and they can increase like learning, and I mean, they're just part of our modern society. And I think most of us can at least agree with that they are part of our modern society. But does it actually improve students' outcomes to hand out computers or laptops to all students? So there is a lot of papers that actually shows that this has no effect at all when it comes to students' outcomes. So these are just 2 papers. This uses this kind of like randomized control experiments, where like some students got computers while others did not, and they just show that like giving laptops to every student has no effects on their educational outcomes. But what is instead actually shown to have some kind of effect is if we use these laptops and if we use like computer-aided instructions during the lecture. So if we should give out laptops to children in school, it has to be in a very structured way. So integrating computers, in a more structured way might actually improve students' outcomes. And what these 2 papers shows is that is especially if other resources in schools are scarce. So like if there are big classes, or I mean we lack teachers or so on, then this can actually have a positive impact on students. Okay, so don't just give out computers or laptops to students. It has to be in a structured way if it actually should improve their outcomes. But even if these laptops maybe don't have so much of an effect, there is also research that shows that, I mean, laptops might have, even if they have no effects, they might still be beneficial, because there is a very low marginal cost of giving individuals laptops instead of giving them school books, because laptops are today so cheap to buy. Okay, so I will end my lecture with some policy advice. This mostly comes from my own research. So, first of all, it's very important to understand like the impact of structured versus unstructured technology in schools. The research seems to suggest that banning or limiting this access to this unstructured technology in school, for instance, smartphones, as I will show you now, that might actually have a positive impact on students instead. So this is from my own research, where I surveyed all the Norwegian middle schools in what year they banned phones from the classroom. This data is then matched to the Norwegian population registry, where I have all students, where I have their grades and their test scores and so on, and I also have access to whether they go to the GP or a psychologist for mental health issues. And what this graph just shows is that students that, because middle school is 3 years in Norway, so what this graph shows is that students that, when they started middle school, there were already a phone ban in place at their school. What these graphs shows is that that has positive effect on their grade point average. And the same thing is for mental health consultations, but that goes only for girls. So the reason why this potentially has larger effect on girls and not on boys is, as I showed you before, girls are a lot more likely to use social media and so on. So they are more distracted by having phones in school. I see the same effect when it comes to bullying. So when schools ban phones, bullying also declines. Okay, so to conclude, because I think my time is up, social media has contributed to the recent decline in mental health among teenagers, but it's of course just one part of many reasons to this increase. I mean, this is very important because, like, the childhood and the adolescency are very crucial for social and emotional development. And mental health issues during, like, these very critical years can affect, like, your future education or your employment. And this just suggests that the earlier we act, the better the long-term benefit, or the more long-term benefit we will have. So ICT investments such as laptops in school that only, like, increases technology access. It could be the laptops or just having access to internet in school. I mean, without any clear educational goals, I mean, that will have very limited impacts on learning outcomes on students. So when we think about policies, I would just like to end and say that it's very important that we think about, like, the underlying mechanism, because, I mean, the burden should not fall on us as parents or teachers or the students themselves, because public policy should really target the source or the root of these causes. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this incredibly interesting speech. Mamy czas na jedno pytanie z sali. Czy ktoś z Państwa chciałby?
We have time for one question from the audience. Who would like to ask it? Here we have one person.
Is in academic performance between boys and girls, and I would like to ask about a significant difference in mental health between boys and girls. Like, we know men commit suicide way more often and generally avoid mental health consultations and psychiatrists. So how would you like to combat that, and do you have any ideas on how to fix that? Thank you.
That's very true. We know that, that these graphs, because when we often look at this data, we only have data on who actually went to the GP or the specialist for help. So girls are a lot more likely to just seek help, and that's one of the reasons why we see that they have more mental health issues. And, like, ultimately, instead, what we see is that, men, they commit more suicides, as you say. So, it's very hard to answer, like, how technology and school and so on affects this, but we at least know that, both girls and boys are exposed, like, quite equally to, like, bullying in school, but we know that, in the end, men are more likely to commit suicide, while girls maybe seek more health care, and that's, of course, something we should be aware of, but that could be related to stigma and so on. So yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
yes. Unfortunately, we don't have time for other questions, but I hope, Sara, you will be open for some networking during coffee break.